Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Going to be talking about humanoids today. This is kind of my specialty. I love digging up these obscure cases from all over the world involving different kinds of humanoids. Many different kinds of humanoids today. I call this episode The Thing at the Window and 9 other very weird humanoid encounters. And yeah, trust me, they are weird. The variety of humanoids is astonishing. There are a couple of cases involving greys, but we've got some human-looking ETs, some that are not quite human, most I should say, but little, short beings, all different kinds. The variety is mind-boggling. It's very hard to categorize these. Some I think are unique. I've never heard anything quite like it. But I do love finding cases from far-flung areas all over the globe, and I'm really traveling all over the planet today. So the cases today come from Argentina, Azerbaijan, Bermuda, Brazil, Canada, Finland, Italy, Wales, Yugoslavia, and one from the United States, which is Connecticut. These cases that I'm presenting today began in 1962, with some recent cases as late as 2005. I've said this many times, but I think it bears repeating. Each case has something to offer in terms of teaching us about the extraterrestrial presence on this planet. But honestly, I think that it's important that people know these events do happen, and that the vast majority of people who have this kind of experience don't report it. I am sure it numbers in the millions. So let's just get started with these amazing and fascinating cases. First one I want to talk about today occurred in August of 1962, and we're going to Finland for this case. I call this one an extraterrestrial hitchhiker. This occurred in Puolanka, Finland in August of 1962. What I like about this case is that there are a number of cases involving people who are driving along and see a figure alongside the road who's basically hitching a ride, and they offer this person a ride. And of course, this turns out to be someone who is quite unusual and apparently an extraterrestrial. I did a whole episode about this previously. You can find it here on this channel. But I found another case, so I just had to include it. This amazing case comes from researcher Tapani Kuningas, actually a very prolific researcher. And this was published in his Finnish language book, UFOs Over Finnish Skies. The main witness is Lieutenant Colonel Ilmari Karunto, age 60. So it was a warm, sunny day in August of 1960 that Ilmari and his friend were on vacation. They'd just taken a swim in a lake and then decided to take a drive from Puolanka to Oulu in Finland. And they had driven about 50 kilometers towards Oulu. This is about 31 miles from Puolanka, when they saw a man flagging them down along the side of the road. And I'll just quote Ilmari directly. As he says, "Suddenly, a small man stood by the side of the road, waving his arms to stop the car. It was decided to take the man with us. He got into the car and said he wanted to go to a forest path 5 kilometers away. I was surprised by the size of the man's head. I thought it was strangely large. He was wearing a brown, beret-like hat, light pants, and a darker sweater. So these clothes were somewhat loose-fitting. He also wore white boots. So Ilmari got into the back seat, and this strange little man took the front passenger seat. Ilmari instantly noticed other strange details, because as he watched the man through the rear-view mirror, he got an incredible shock. When the man blinked his eyes, his eyelids moved from bottom to top, instead of down like ours. And he looked different than a normal person in a number of ways. He had round black eyes, a large nose, a wide, thin-lipped mouth, and apparently sensing that Ilmari was scrutinizing him, this little man quickly slipped on a pair of black sunglasses. And it was then that Ilmari noticed something else. The man had 6 thin, grayish-brown fingers on each hand. That's definitely unusual. But strangely, Ilmari's friend who was driving did not seem to notice anything strange about their passenger. Or if he did, he wasn't saying anything. But curious and concerned, Ilmari then asked the man where he lived in Finland. Now the man became thoughtful. He seemed to be considering the question, and then answered Ilmari, apparently telepathically, as Ilmari explains, as if in a separate voice in my brain. And the little man said that he was not from Finland and that he traveled around the world. So that's kind of intriguing and sidestepping the answer. And it was at this point that they reached the pathway the man had mentioned. He wanted them to drive him to this pathway in the forest. So they reached this location. Ilmari's friend stopped the car and the man stepped out. He thanked them for the ride and began to walk down the trail. Now convinced that this man was very unusual, Ilmari suggested that they keep an eye on the man as he walked away. So they did. Ilmari and his friend watched the man walk about 150 feet down this forested path, and when the man came upon a pile of brushwood about 10 feet high, the man didn't walk, he seemed to float up on top of this woodpile and levitate over it. And Ilmari shouted out, "Look, he can levitate." So Ilmari and now, of course, his friend were both shocked. But as the man was now no longer visible, they continued on their journey. But they had only gone a short distance when the car's engine started to falter and then failed completely. So they stepped out of the car to investigate, and that is when they saw a large disc-shaped craft about 15 to 20 feet wide, they estimate. This craft hovered overhead, it made a wide turn around them, and then darted off, disappearing from view. So presumably this could be the little humanoid's craft. Hard to say, but what a coincidence that is. So they got back into the car, which now started normally, and checking the newspapers the next day, they did find an article that other people had seen a UFO in that area on the same day that they had their experience with this little big-headed man and, of course, the UFO. Okay, I think you'll agree that's pretty weird, and the details start to add up that this is not a normal person. It's one thing to see a short little guy on the side of the road, but then you realize he has 6 fingers, he starts speaking telepathically, his eyes are weird. I mean, the details add up. They let him go, he levitates. So I think at this point we can conclude that this is not a normal person. But then they see this UFO. So I think that kind of clinches it. This guy was probably an ET. Really amazing to me. Quite a few cases of extraterrestrial hitchhikers. But now let's move to the next case. This one I found pretty interesting. We're moving now to Canada, Ottawa, Canada. There's quite a few cases of UFOs hovering over reservoirs, and that's what we see in this case. I call this one the ETs at the reservoir. This occurred one evening in August 1965, again, Ottawa, Canada. It is a multiple witness case, so only one witness did come forward. The case was researched by an experienced investigator. It's got some pretty unusual details to it. This case was investigated by APRO field investigator Louis Normandin and was published in the September-October 1972 issue of the APRO Bulletin, APRO being the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. This case involves 2 witnesses, Mr. Harris and his girlfriend. Now, Mr. Harris has been in the Royal Air Force, so he's a pretty good witness. Around 9 to 10 p.m. one evening in August of 1965, Mr. Harris and his friend had parked at the base of the Carlington Heights pump station and underground reservoir in Ottawa, Canada. They were at the bottom of what is known as Carlington Hill. This is in Carlington Park. The pump station sits at the top. And as they were in their car, suddenly they saw a flash of light which lit up the whole area around them. And looking out the front windshield of their car, they now saw a strange glowing object slowly approaching the area. It had what appeared to be 4 searchlights coming out from underneath it and shining down on the ground. And this craft kept moving until it was just above the reservoir pumping station, about 15 to 20 feet in the air, they estimate. It was at this point that a kind of sliding door opened up on the side of the craft, and they could now see a figure standing in this opening. It was too far away to make out any real details other than that this figure was wearing what appeared to be a dark and shiny jumpsuit. So they couldn't determine how tall this figure was, nor could they see any facial features. But this first figure was quickly joined by two other figures. Now, Mr. Harris was wondering at this point if this might be some sort of secret Air Force experimental craft. He had no fear. But this craft remained there for about 15 minutes, hovering over this reservoir, which is very strange. It was during this time that his girlfriend became increasingly frightened, and she started to urge him to drive away, and she became so frightened that he finally did. This object and these humanoids were still there when they left. So Mr. Harris clearly came to the conclusion that these might not have been human, as he reported it to APRO researcher Louis Normandin. Now Louis visited the site, and he notes that the area of this sighting not only contains a reservoir, which is known to attract UFOs, but also a nearby quarry and high-tension lines, both, of course, of which are well-known UFO attractors. There are a lot of cases of UFOs hovering over technological installations or reservoirs or dams, high-tension lines, of course, and quarries. These are also, as I said, UFO attractors. I guess that's what was going on here. But 15 minutes is a pretty long time to see something like this. An important case, I think. All right, moving along to case number 3. And now we're going to Yugoslavia. Formerly Yugoslavia, it's now Slovenia. This is a pretty interesting case for sure. A multiple witness case. Took place over a period of days, actually. So I call this one Strange Creatures. Certainly do not appear to be human. The main case occurred on October 7, 1972, south of Ljubljana. This is again in Yugoslavia, and I think you'll find it a pretty compelling case. This case comes from Yugoslavian researcher Milos Kremelj, who was APRO's Yugoslavian representative for many years. This case was published in the March-April 1973 issue of the APRO Bulletin. The primary witness is an innkeeper known only as Mrs. H. At the time of the encounter, she was 60 years old. It was 9 a.m. on the morning of October 7, 1972, that Mrs. H had gone to the hairdresser and was riding her bicycle back to her home in a small village south of Ljubljana. This is a very rural area, and looking to a hill along the side of the road, she was amazed to see two 3-foot-tall figures walking along the edge of a hill about 500 feet away. She said one of the figures was slightly taller than the other two, but yeah, they were very short, and they also looked strange. They were wearing, quote, a sort of white gown. They had a black belt around their waists and round caps on their heads. Their faces were too dark and too far away to see any detail, but also weird was that they walked so closely together that their shoulders were touching each other. In fact, their appearance was so strange that the witness got off her bicycle and slowly walked, keeping her eyes on the strange figures. And after watching them for a few minutes and seeing nobody else in the area, she decided to just leave the area as she was responsible for opening the inn. But she was convinced that these people were not normal humans. So arriving at the inn, she told her husband and asked him to go back and take a look, but he didn't want to. And she tried telling others, but everyone she told just ridiculed her. But then one of the men at the inn heard her talking and pulled her aside, and he asked her where she had seen these figures. And when she told him, he told her that the night before, his children had come running home and were very frightened, as they claimed to have seen two white figures walking through a turnip field in this same area. The figures seemed to rise up from the field and then began to approach the children, And the children said that the figures were, quote, strange creatures. They were wearing white hoods on their heads and had dark clothing on. And they were very close to these figures, less than 10 feet away. So they got a good look at them. And they weren't human. One said that they had, quote, spotted faces. And when they were first seen, they looked like they were crawling on their hands and knees in the field. And as it turns out, this was their second sighting of these weird humanoids, because the night before this, they saw two figures wearing white gowns, much like Mrs. H described. And like Mrs. H said, one figure was slightly taller than the other. They saw what they believed to be a car behind the figures. Now the investigator speculates that the children might have assumed that this was a car, when the car might have been something else, so presumably a UFO, though there's no real good evidence of that. But, in further confirmation, at the time of these encounters, there was a flap of sightings going on in the area. I think that case is a good example of how most of these incidents slide under the radar, are not publicized. It was really pure chance that this came to be known by us at all. And when you consider that the woman was ridiculed, she bravely talked about this. And only because she talked about it did we find out that there were other witnesses. No, there's no direct UFO connection here, unless the children did mistake a car for a UFO, which is certainly possible, as the investigator theorized. Though I don't think we have enough data to really say that that was what was happening. But given that there were two separate incidents, three really, and the children were absolutely convinced that these were not human beings, I think it's an important case. All right, let's move along. We're now going to Wales. If you live in the UK, you very well may have heard of this case. It did get quite a bit of publicity, actually. So it is fairly well known. But I think it's a really important case because it's so incredibly complex. And there's some elements of high strangeness to it that are just so baffling. So I call this one The Thing at the Window. This one occurred in April of 1977 near Dyfed, Wales. And this case occurred during a huge wave of activity in this area. But this involves multiple sightings of humanoids, UFOs, and quite a few witnesses. This extraordinarily complex case was widely published in the British press, and at the time there was a huge wave of sightings occurring in the Broadhaven area of Wales. But it was the experiences of the Combs family of Ripperston Farm that seemed to be the target of a lot of the activity. And it all began in early 1977, around March, when Pauline Combs, the mother, was driving to her home near Talbany. This is in Dyfed, Wales, and she saw a silvery sphere pacing her car. So she told her husband, but he just joked to her about it, and as Pauline says, he had pulled my leg about it so much that I didn't like to say anything to him. Now her husband, Billy Combs, would soon change his mind, because it was on the night of April 24, 1977, not long after this sighting, that Billy and Pauline Combs were in their home watching TV. Their 5 children were asleep upstairs and their dog lay by the fireplace. And suddenly Pauline started to notice a weird shimmering light by the living room window. And this kept going on and off for about 2 hours, but she ignored it. But then suddenly her husband Billy jumped up and stared out the window. And as Pauline says in her own words, he jumped to his feet with his arms across his face, as if to ward something off, and shouted, "What the hell is that?" He pulled me to my feet, clung to me, and then I saw what had frightened him. A towering figure, at least 8 feet tall, glowing in a silver suit. It was so big we couldn't even see the top of its head as it looked in. It was wearing a helmet with some sort of shiny black visor. A pipe went from the mouth to the back of its head. It was not a man, it was more of a monster. It was silver in color and had a glow like an astronaut. I have no idea what it was, but it could have been something from another planet. I was petrified. We were rooted to the spot with terror. It radiated a sort of luminous light, and when it touched the window, the pane started to rattle like all hell had broken loose. Yet there was no wind. Slowly I got my wits together and raced upstairs to see if the children were all right, while Billy kept watch. Billy put the dog out, but he went mad with fear. And as Billy says, it just stood there looking in. We were both shaking with absolute terror. There was no way we could have imagined it. Now at this time, while this man was outside their window, the TV burned out. Pauline immediately called the police, and as she says, all the time, the thing was looking in. 15 minutes later, the police drove up, and this is when the figure promptly disappeared. But the next day, they found that the rose bush near the window where the figure had looked in and the wall surrounding the window were both scorched. Later, the area was tested for radiation and was found to contain higher levels than normal. But this visitation was just the first of a series of UFO and humanoid sightings and other bizarre events which would occur over the next few months. And in fact, on May 15, 1977, the Combs children were playing out in the fields of their farm when they saw a silver-suited figure walk by them, only 70 feet away. It moved up to a hedge and seemed to walk through a barbed wire fence and then promptly disappeared. Looking at the other side of the field, they could now see a saucer-shaped craft with a red light on top coming down as if for a landing. Immediately a ramp came out and they saw this red box-like contraption come down the ramp. The craft then took off, leaving a burned circle in the field. They also found the being's footprints. And it just went on and on. On October 30, 1977, Pauline, her mother, and two of her daughters saw a small circular object seeming to fly into the rocks by the nearby beach. So Pauline went down with two of her kids, and as she says, we went down for a closer look and saw two figures in silver suits. One seemed to be walking up and down stairs inside the rocks, while the other was walking almost on the water. They were walking about on the rocks, their heads down, as if they were looking for something. Then they disappeared inside the rocks. Now to Pauline, it looked almost like there was a doorway of some kind opening up and this figure disappeared inside it. Investigators later found another witness to this event, but this witness refused to come forward and insisted upon being anonymous. Now during all this time, all kinds of other strange things were happening. The Combs' electric bill was far higher than it normally was. The milk of their cows dropped dramatically. 5 of their TV sets burned out under mysterious circumstances, and they had all kinds of unexplained electrical problems with all of their cars. They ended up going through 8 vehicles. Now, one of the most bizarre incidents was their herd of cattle, which kept disappearing. These cattle were locked up in their pen, only to come up missing again and again. A search would ensue, and they would be found at somebody else's farm or in some other location. And as Billy, the father, says, that was a queer thing, and it still takes some believing. One day it happened 5 or 6 times. The herd kept disappearing, although I padlocked them in, and turning up at someone else's farm. Every time I brought them back to my farm, they would vanish again. I thought I was going around the bend. Now all this time, numerous people in the area were reporting sightings, and a few reported humanoids, usually tall, silver-suited figures. One anonymous police inspector who investigated some of these cases told reporters, "After what I've seen around here, nothing would surprise me now." One corroborating witness is Josephine Hewison, who is the Combs' neighbor, and she said that one evening a year earlier in 1976, she looked out her bedroom window and saw a 50-foot wide silver disc-shaped craft just sitting on the ground near her greenhouse. Her first thought was that somebody had parked by her greenhouse, but she took a closer second look and realized that this was something much more strange. As Josephine says, it had no visible windows or openings. I waited for something to emerge, but it didn't. After a few minutes, It just silently lifted into the sky and disappeared. It left no mark, not even a broken twig. I thought it was a UFO. I don't think it could have been anything else. I am not a fanciful person, and I always tell the truth. I would swear on the Bible that I saw this thing in the garden. Now another time, Pauline Combs was driving with 3 of her children when her 10-year-old son, Kieran, shouted out that a UFO was following them. They all saw this strange craft, which they described as shaped like a football. It was sending down a beam of light at the bottom, a red light. It followed them for a mile, and just as they reached their home, their car engine and lights died. Everyone went running into the house, and as Pauline says, we were all very frightened, especially the children, who were in tears. Now Pauline does say that this all culminated one evening in the summer of 1977 when she dreamed that she was taken on board a spacecraft, put on a table, given what she believes was an injection, and she really wondered if this might have been a dream until she heard about the Betty and Barney Hill case and was struck by the many similarities of their experience to hers. It should come as no surprise that the activity at the farm soon attracted reporters and researchers, and before long, tourists. As Billy Combs says, they come in the daytime when I'm working, and they won't take no for an answer. The Combs ended up moving away from the farm shortly later after all these incidents, but they deny that the move had anything to do with all this activity. But there is an entire book titled The Uninvited, The True Story of the Ripperston Farm, authored by Clive Harold. This tells the whole story of the many events experienced by the Combs family. It was reportedly sensationalized to some degree, but I think it's important to note that the Combs received no money for the publication of the book or any of the many newspaper articles about their case. And as her husband Billy says, she has been offered money, but she's never accepted it. In my opinion, she's a fool. She should have taken it. Now, also certainly related to this are the many other sightings in this area, including the very famous Broadhaven Primary School sighting in February of 1977, when a group of children and a few school officials saw a landed UFO and, of course, a strange humanoid. Obviously a very complex case with so much to unpack. And it's really hard to deny when you have a whole family seeing this stuff, the neighbors seeing this stuff, that famous Broadhaven schoolyard incident occurring not far away during this time. So there's little doubt that something very unusual is happening here. I think one of those craziest incidents that occurred with this family, the Combs family, is the disappearing cows. It reminded me of the Arthur Godfrey case, where a witness reported the same darn thing. His herd of cows went missing. So I don't know what the ETs are doing here, because they're not taking the cows, they're just moving them around. Don't know if this is a display to sort of mess around with people in a sense of humor kind of way, or if they're actually doing something more intentional. It's very odd. It's one of the things about these UFO encounters. There's lots of high strangeness. And I sometimes wonder if this is intentional in a way to make us sort of think outside the box, consider new paradigms, consider new ways of thinking, or just really bend our minds. I don't know. It's very odd. All right, now let's move to Bermuda. This is a really astonishing case. Again, multiple witnesses. Apparently there were photographs. I wasn't able to find them, unfortunately. But I think you'll find this an incredible case. I call this one, I will remember this as long as I live. This occurred on August 22nd, 1978 at Southampton Parish. This is on the island of Bermuda, which is quite isolated. There is a number of cases in this area though, but this case, I think you'll find it to be absolutely fascinating. This case was reported to Newfork, the National UFO Reporting Center, by the witness who provided his first-hand testimony some 30 years after the event occurred. He is anonymous, so I'll just call him Carl. He was 24 years old at the time, newly married, and actually on his honeymoon with his new wife. They had married on August 19, 1978, and it was 3 days later, August 22nd, that they arrived at the island of Bermuda. They were staying at a resort called the Reefs Resort and Club, located on the southwestern edge of the island. This club is located in a small U-shaped cove facing south towards the open ocean. It was around 7:30 p.m. that they were sitting outside enjoying dinner in the beautiful sunset on this balcony or veranda. Some friends were with them, and this was when Carl saw something unusual. As Carl says in his own words, "I noticed off to the east what appears to be a helicopter with two big searchlights sweeping the water out on the horizon. I notice other guests are seeing this also. I also observed a man in a dark suit sitting just behind me at a table with a camera and a long telephoto lens, snapping away pictures like crazy. He was so out of place, in a suit and alone at a resort." Now that seemed to be the end of it. Then, after dinner, Carl and his wife decided to take a walk along the beach. They were about 30 feet from the water when suddenly the area around them was lit up with an intensely bright light, or as Carl described it, quote, "like Richard Dreyfuss at the railroad crossing in Close Encounters of the Third Kind." And as Carl says, "an intensely white spotlight from the helicopter was shining on us from no less than 100 feet in the air, and 100 feet close." I am looking at this for a few seconds as the light starts to dim. I can see the element in the spotlight glowing red as a flame inside burns off. Also, what appears to be gas lines retract from the rear of the light with a flame burning from that also. They both retract into the bottom of the copter, or so I thought. Now at this point, Carl doesn't think it's a copter because he looks at his wife and exclaims, "That's no copter, it's a flying saucer." And as Carl says, "I look to my right, and the only thing I see is my wife running to our room." So he yelled at her, "Come back! It's not every day you see one of these." And she yelled back to him, "I do not want them to take me again." Carl was absolutely shocked. Again, as Carl says, "knock me over with a feather." I make note of that, but I continue to check it out. It's still hovering, about 35 feet in diameter, with a bank of rectangular windows completely around its upper circumference. Several red lights appear on its top part, but they went off when the spotlight did. I now notice all the people on the balcony where we had dinner. They are screaming and yelling about it and taking pictures. Flashbulbs are going off, like at the end of a rock concert. Now realizing he had his own camera, Carl did try to take pictures, but he could not get his camera to work. He was able to use the viewfinder on his camera as a kind of binocular and was shocked at what he saw. As Carl says, "Oh my God, I can see two ETs to the right of the saucer waving to the people on the balcony. I then realize one is to the left looking straight down at me. I now know what it means to have the hair stand on the back of your neck. That thing looked through me, not just at me. The ETs were definitely the Greys as described by others. Those big black eyes, I will never forget them." I then noticed the Grey that was looking at me turn its head to its left. The saucer then starts to move out over the ocean. It is behind my apartment for a few seconds as I run to my left towards the end of the jetty wall. It is now already 200 yards offshore and rising. I now hear thunder behind me getting louder, and I realize the RAF is sending jets after it. So as Carl watches, these jets chase the UFO off into the distance, and he lamented the fact that he didn't have his camcorder. So at that point they decided to call it a day. They returned to their room in the resort. It was now about 11 p.m. and it was about 4 a.m. as they went to sleep. Now Carl was asleep when suddenly he heard his wife shout out, "Wake up! Wake up! They were just here." So Carl wakes up and says, "Who?" And his wife says, "The space people." So he's bewildered and asks her, "What?" And she explains, "Someone just laid me down on the bed." And as Carl says, I look over, and she is on top of the covers. I am under. I woke up to see a gray alien at the foot of the bed turn towards me, lift his right hand, and wave. He then turned and hopped into the air and out our balcony door. I quickly jumped out of bed to look, and of course, nothing is there. So the next day, Carl and his wife talked with other people about what they saw, and they told them that they should have been there the night before, as there were dozens of saucers buzzing around the island. They thought it was an alien invasion. Now, per Paul, this story is partially documented in the Bermuda Royal Gazette newspaper under the headline, Close Encounters of the Bermudian Kind. Now, one curious endnote, Carl says that despite the many people who were taking photographs that night, he has never seen any of these photographs posted anywhere. I did a long search to try and find these alleged photos. Doesn't surprise me that I couldn't find them. Most photos don't get a lot of attention. Where are you going to publish them? Newspapers aren't always interested in them. And if you have a good photo, people cry out, oh, hoax. Especially these days. You really just can't trust photos with all the AI, the Photoshop, and the faking going on. It's really unfortunate because I think there are really good photos out there. I really feel for the husband in that case when his wife goes running off, his brand new wife, saying, oh no, not again, they're coming for me. So apparently she did not tell him that she is a contactee. And we also see this pattern quite a bit where people see a UFO and later that night the ETs show up, which is of course exactly what happened in that case. So interesting. All right, now let's go to Italy. I doubt you've heard of this case, and honestly there's not a lot to it, but I had to include it because of this really interesting aftermath and confirmation, which does involve photos, which I was able to find. So I call this case Like Those Who Go to the Moon. This occurred on January 13, 1979 in Viterbo, Italy, and it involves largely a single witness, though again there were some additional corroborating witnesses who captured a photograph that I think provides excellent confirmation of what this farmer in Italy saw. It was 4:30 p.m. January 13, 1979, as farmer Vittorio Mancini, age 40, was working the fields of his farm located around the 12-kilometer mark on the road between Viterbo, Italy, and Tuscania. Suddenly, and without warning, his attention was drawn to a very bright red light about 800 to 900 feet away, and as Vittorio says, it was like looking at glowing embers in a fire, as big as a tractor tire. So this brilliant red light lowered down to the ground and seemed to land or hover just above the ground. Very quickly, the brightness decreased, it turned orange, and then faded away until it was practically gone, and in its place, Vittorio could now see a 6-foot-wide metallic object. No sooner did he see this when he saw something incredible. A humanoid. He said it appeared to be a, quote, small man. He estimates it was just under 3 feet tall, and he could see it was wearing a silvery white suit, or as Vittorio says, it looked like the kind worn by those who go to the moon. This little man was hopping and walking around the craft, and it bent down every now and then, seeming to pick something up. Vittorio was both frightened and curious. He didn't know how to interpret what he was seeing. So he decided to go get other witnesses. He hopped into his car and drove to a nearby restaurant where he knew his nephews were working. He wanted to get them to see this little man too. So he picks them up, but as soon as he turns the key to his car, the engine not only doesn't start, it made a loud banging noise. Now he feels this was some way related to the incident because, as Vittorio says, in that instant, I had a feeling that we wouldn't see anything else. So he turned the key again, and this time the engine started. So they returned together to where he saw the entity just a short distance away, but of course by now it was gone. He did later report the event to the police. They went to the site but found nothing unusual. Now later, researchers discovered that on that same day, around that same time, not far away, two young boys were in their home at 83 Via Dominici Corvi in Viterbo. Suddenly they felt this very weird, strong, persistent urge to go out onto their balcony. And as one of the witnesses, 13-year-old Mauro Garbaroli says, quote, "We found ourselves moving like automatons out onto the terrace. There, we spotted a red, disc-shaped flying object that was traveling at low speed at an altitude of approximately 2,000 to 3,000 meters above the ground." So they immediately took photographs, and as you can see, these were later published in newspapers. So it appears that they photographed the same saucer that the farmer Vittorio saw. Obviously, it's impossible to say for sure that these boys actually photographed the same UFO seen by this farmer, but it sure looks like it, given that it was in the same area at the same time. How amazing is that? Because there are only a handful of cases involving people who've been able to photograph a UFO and see the humanoids as well. So basically, they're photographing the UFO that the humanoids came out of. I've covered a few on this channel. If you've seen the other episodes, they're there. So yeah, this does happen, and I think it's excellent confirmation of a case. All right, now we're going to go to Argentina. Here's a case that I will be very surprised if you've heard before, because it's only gotten a tiny little bit of publicity. But it's an absolutely fascinating and very unusual case with some important details that I think provide confirmation because they're not that well known and yet they turn up fairly consistently. So I call this case 10-Year-Old Girl Meets Aliens. This occurred on January 25, 1979 in a very small town called El Din. This is in Argentina. This case was published in the La Nación newspaper. The witness is Marta Isabel Carbajal, a 10-year-old girl in the small town of El Din. This is in Santiago del Estero, Argentina. She was playing alone in the den of her grandparents' home. This is separate from the main house. This is not too far from a nearby airport. Suddenly, Marta saw a strange, kind of rectangular-shaped object descend from the sky and land under the shade of a large tree in the yard of their home. So she stepped to the window for a closer look, and she could see that this craft did not actually land, but it was hovering just above the ground. And immediately, two small men, each about 3 foot tall, somehow emerged from this craft. Moments later, 5 more came out, who were slightly shorter than the first 2. Now, like the craft, all the figures seemed to hover just a few inches above the ground. She said the men were all dressed in black jumpsuits, black boots. They had a head covering of some kind. There was something on their back, like a hose or siphon. On the arms, on their sleeves, were bands of what looked like bright beads. Now, one of the little men, who she perceived to be the leader, walked up to her and spoke to her in perfect Spanish and invited her to come closer. Now, Marta instinctively refused. At that moment, a kind of flashlight, which seemed to be attached to the suit of the leader, it flashed out and went directly into Isabel's eyes, blinding her. She became disoriented. There was a sort of gap. She doesn't remember what happened or how much time passed, but the next thing she knew, the first 2 beings were re-entering the craft, and the other 5 followed, but were lifted into the craft by a metallic arm of some kind. The craft then rose quickly upwards and darted away in perfect silence, disappearing into the distance in seconds. So Marta immediately ran to tell her grandparents, and they noticed at this point that Marta was suffering from a minor discomfort in her eyes, so they washed her face. And when questioned, the girl said that she had heard of UFOs, but didn't know anything about them. She was in the 1st grade, and she was actually repeating it, as she had not yet learned how to read, so she certainly could not have read about UFOs. Now, that case was not formally investigated, but certainly interesting. And again, yeah, there are some details there that make me think this case is genuine. The way the ETs walked up to this little girl and spoke in perfect Spanish, we see that again and again. ETs speaking in the person's native language. The fact that she also experienced eye irritation, that's a very common physiological effect. In fact, it's the most common physiological effect. It's just an interesting case because many people do describe seeing these short little humanoids dressed in jumpsuits. Jumpsuits seem to be the prevailing fashion worn by these ETs. All right, let's move along. This is another multiple witness case which was professionally investigated, and while it is brief, there's some interesting confirmation to it because there are multiple witnesses and apparently some other cases in that area at that time. So I call this one Don't Look Back. This occurred on September 11, 1980 in Wellington, Connecticut. And I think it's an important case, even if it is quite short. This next case was investigated by highly respected researcher Lawrence Fawcett. It involves 4 witnesses, a married couple, Milt Shippey and his wife Constance, and Constance's mother and their daughter Karen. There were 3 young children, but they were asleep in the car at the time of the incident. Now, per Lawrence Fawcett, he was very much impressed with the witnesses' credibility and the consistency of their testimony. The incident occurred at 9:25 p.m. on September 11, 1980. The family was heading south on Route 32 in their station wagon. They had just exited Interstate 86. This is just north of West Wellington, Connecticut. Looking up, they all suddenly noticed a flattish, disc-shaped object with a small transparent dome on top, very low to the horizon to the southeast. The craft had an orange rim of light around the perimeter circumference, which was somewhat obscured by a slight haze that surrounded the object. Now, this object was pretty big. They estimate it was about 100 feet wide, but no more than 400 feet away, and it was tilted up at an angle as it flew down towards the witnesses at an estimated 50 miles per hour. And soon, it was only 400 feet away from them, so pretty close. Only Milton said that inside the dome he saw a humanoid figure, or rather the head of a figure. He was unable to discern if the figure was bald or was wearing a helmet, but it did not look normal. Milt decided not to stop the car, and instead he just kept driving. They did drive the same route the next night, keeping an eye out for anything that they might have mistaken for this UFO, such as streetlights or any structures in the area, but of course found nothing. Now, researcher Lawrence Fawcett did his due diligence and phoned several plane advertising companies, 4 airports. He even called the Goodyear Blimp Company to see if any of them might be responsible for the strange sighting. But what the Shippey family saw remains a mystery. There were, however, a few other sightings in this area around that same time. Yes, that case is quite short, but certainly interesting. And I can't blame the witnesses for driving off, because that's got to be a disconcerting experience. But such a shame, because I wonder what would have happened if they just pulled over and took a closer look at this craft. There might have been a greater interaction. But again, can't blame them. It's got to be quite a shock to see something like that. An amazing case. Now let's move to the next one. We're going all the way to Brazil now. And of all the cases in this compilation, this one definitely takes first prize for high strangeness. I call this one The Weird Humanoid at the Ranch. This case took place actually over a period of 3 days, September 20 to 22nd, 1997, at Matuus, Lima, Brazil. While this is technically a single witness case, the witness's family did verify these events. But the humanoid is so strange. There's quite a few strange details to this one. This very, very unusual case comes from researcher Holvio Brandt Aleixo and was published in the winter 1999 issue of the Flying Saucer Review. As Holvio writes, I have made an extensive study of this case. There is one primary witness, Jose Rodriguez Correa, who had a farm ranch called Rancho Alegre. This is just outside of Matuas, Lime, in Minas Gerais, Brazil. Now the weirdness and high strangeness began around noon on September 20, 1997, when Jose went to check the hen house and he noticed that some of the birds were missing. Now his wife had fed them 1 hour earlier, and she said that at that time all the birds were there. But now Jose counted the birds and realized that 17 of them were missing, and there was no sign of how they had escaped. So Jose immediately searched the property, and he did find a few feathers and what appeared to be small spots of blood on the ground. A more extensive search located one dead chicken in a nearby ditch, but the only sign of injury was a small puncture wound. There was no other sign of anything unusual, other than his son said he felt a strange sensation of, quote, goose pimples. Now events escalated the next evening on September 21st, when Jose heard the chickens acting up in the hen house. So he had his revolver ready, and running outside, he thought he saw the dark shadow of a humanoid figure, only about 4 feet tall, near the hen house. It was really too dark for him to see it clearly. He was about 30 feet away from it, and he took immediate action. He fired a shot, and it sounded to him like this creature fell heavily to the ground and then moved away over the dead leaves. So at first light, they examined the area, and they did find some crushed vegetation, but no body. But they did find that 2 of their chickens in the hen house were dead, again with no sign of how anything got in or out. Now around noon that same day, Jose started to get a strange feeling that something was going to happen. And at 3 p.m., it did. It's now September 23rd. Jose patrolled the property with a revolver in hand, and this is when he saw a humanoid rise up from the ditch next to their property and look at him. This humanoid was dark in color, and while humanoid, was definitely not human. As Jose says in his own words, he was real ugly, much uglier than any creature here in this world. The top of its head was much flatter. The eyes were bigger than ours, round, quite bugged out, with yellow spots on them, unblinking. There was a light-colored area between the eyebrows and the eyes. Its head was much flatter than ours, flat, wide, but full. The face was pretty wrinkled, sort of like an orangutan. Skin was dark, all dark. It had no mustache, but it had a shortish goatee of the same shade as the hair. The hair was reddish-brown, the color of ground coffee, but a bit deeper in shade than that. The hair was sticking up. He had quite a big top knot sticking up. The mouth was half closed, wide, sort of like an orangutan, quite wrinkled, a bit squarish, very weird. 2 big, broad, very white teeth, white like cotton. There was a yellow stripe around the neck. Now Jose insists that this creature was definitely not a monkey, definitely not a human, though he said it had large hands like a human, with very light palms. He believes it had only 4 fingers on each hand. He got a good look at it. It was just about 15 feet away from him. Now he could only see it from the waist up as it was standing among the bushes. But if all of this wasn't strange enough, the creature was gazing directly at him, and it held up its right hand, almost in a kind of greeting gesture. And at the same time, he could smell a powerful odor, which he described as, quote, like crushed garlic mixed with sulfur. Now the strangest part of the episode was yet to come. After just a few moments of staring at this strange humanoid and realizing it was not human, Jose was getting ready to fire his revolver when a very strange thought entered his mind. He thought, quote, maybe if I fire my revolver, the thing will make it explode in my face. So he hesitated to fire, and this gave the creature just enough time to dive back into the ditch and disappear among the bushes. Jose immediately searched the area, even going so far as to cut down the bushes with a scythe, but he found no sign whatsoever of the strange creature. nor did he see it ever again. I don't know what to make of this case. It does sound like an ET, although we don't have a direct UFO connection. But what a strange humanoid. I can't imagine that this thing is just living around somewhere in the caves or something. Perhaps it's interdimensional. Really hard to say. Apparently there may have been some telepathic link going on there with the farmer. It was clearly after the chickens, but a truly odd case all around that really makes you wonder what's going on here with some of these weird humanoids and visitations. All right, now let's move to the last and final case. I have never covered a case in this country before, which is Azerbaijan. This one occurred in 2005. I call this case, I Could Only Move My Eyes. Again, occurred in 2005 in Baku, Azerbaijan. And this case was not formally investigated. And there are some details that might make you question its validity, but after really studying this case closely, I think it's genuine for a couple of reasons, as I'll tell you after I present this case. This last and final case was reported to MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, by the witness in 2025 when he was 21 years old. He was 11 years old when his experience occurred. At the time, he was living in Baku, Azerbaijan. This country shares its southern border with Iran and its northern border with Russia. It is along the shore of the Caspian Sea. Now I'll call the witness Raul. As a young boy, Raul's cousin had introduced him to the subject of UFOs, and Raul, as a result, developed an interest in learning more about them. So one day in the summer of 1992, again he's 11 years old, he decided to rent a VHS tape on the subject. Unfortunately, it was in Russian, so Raul's father had to translate it for him, but this movie featured scenes of a gray being given an autopsy. It was that night that Raul had his encounter, and he does not believe this was a dream. As Raul says, "I went to sleep, and I woke up to the sight of 3 gray aliens beside my bed. I tried to move and scream, but I couldn't. I could only move my eyes. I thought of calling my parents, but just couldn't put out a sound. To this day, I can still remember the exact details of their anatomy. Their skin color was dark, almost a greenish gray. They had moderately big almond eyes, a small nose and mouth, no ears. Most importantly, their eyes were not giant and black, and their skulls had actual symmetry, elongated, round and smooth. Now Raul lived near a mosque, and after the morning prayer called out through the loudspeakers, the grays immediately vanished. Raul now found that he could move, but right afterwards he immediately fell asleep. And as Raul says, "No, it wasn't my imagination or sleep paralysis, as they were too real. Even the animation or made-up grays in the documentaries were not close to what I saw." So that morning, he was also surprised to see, quote, "a thin, almost unrecognizable line on my left leg, which gradually faded away." So he was now convinced that his experience was real, and he wondered if they might come back, so he decided not to sleep in his bed. And as Raul says, "With all my curiosity, the next night, I decided to stay awake at the balcony, waiting for a possible visitation. And there it was! I saw a shiny object on the northeast of our building. It was shining so bright. I observed it till sunrise, from around 2:15 to 6:15. It slightly and slowly moved towards the south of our building, going towards the shore of the Caspian Sea. This is not the direction the stars move, and furthermore, he never saw it again." He obviously believed the experience was real enough to report it to MUFON, but yes, there is still some doubt which lingers in his mind. As Raul says, "Since then, I haven't seen anything like that in the sky or seen anything like what I saw in my bedroom. Until that day, and since that day, I haven't experienced anything similar or any sleep paralysis. To this day, I am trying to understand if it was all real or my brain was showing me things while I was sleeping. So there you go, pretty unusual. And I know a skeptic's gonna say, well, this is just a kid, he watched a movie about greys and then he dreamt about them. It's possible, certainly, and the witness himself admitted as much. But he also insists that no, this was a real experience that was far more vivid than any normal dream. And there's details to it that make me think it's real. One is that he reports he could only move his eyes. The number of cases where people report that is very high. Also, he reports seeing a UFO the very next night. Again, this is a pattern that turns up over and over. And also, it's not unusual for someone to develop an interest in the subject, and that's when they have their encounter, almost as if there's ETs out there paying very close attention to a person, and when someone develops an interest, this is when they have their encounter, because there are a lot of cases like this. So also, I'm going to say that an important detail is that the witness's description of the ETs was different from the ones he saw in this movie. So if this was a dream, you'd think he would be dreaming about the movie and see the same kind of ETs. Again, you can make up your own minds about it, but I thought it was an interesting case because of these details and also because of the location. I've never heard of a case in Azerbaijan, although I am 100% certain there are many others. But there you go, 10 cases of humanoids from all over the world. Bet you haven't heard of the vast majority of these. And again, each one has something to teach us. They've all got these little details that repeat again and again, which I think argue for their veracity, because it's impossible to imagine that these people who don't know each other, who come from all over the world, are making up the same kind of stories. That just doesn't make sense. And when you factor in that a number of these cases do have physiological effects and landing traces and animal reactions and so forth, multiple witnesses, it becomes clear that, yeah, this cannot be explained away, as I've said before, and as our governments would have you believe, they cannot be explained away by hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions, and mental illness. So I think the time has come really to accept the veracity of these cases instead of ridiculing and gaslighting witnesses, to take their stories seriously and really try to figure out what's going on here. Because I think that sooner or later, this subject is going to go mainstream for one simple reason: it is real. Sooner or later, there will be disclosure, because you can hide the truth, you can ignore it, you can distort it, you can lie about it, but you will never destroy it. So there you go. Thanks very much, you guys. I truly appreciate you watching, and until next time, keep asking those hard questions, keep searching for the truth. Most important, keep having fun, and I'll see you next Friday for another episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Bye for now.